This is going to get technical, but that's part of it because it's a huge update that's going to impact the way that we play For Honor, the For Honor that we know. And Nico, if you could give us maybe a little bit of a high-level overview. I know we kind of saw it in the trailer, but let's get back into it, and maybe you can give us some details on what the Core Combat update is and what it's trying to accomplish.
Sure, Mike. Yeah, the Core Combat update, it's a series of sweeping changes that are going to impact the Core Combat experience. These are changes that will make the Core Combat more offensive in terms of playstyle. So everything starts with how we made all fight moves more consistent and faster over the network. Then there's a bunch of changes to enhance the offensive meta, things like stamina, being more generous with stamina so that you can fight and throw attacks a lot more. Also, a bunch of damage tweaks, since we're going to be expecting you guys to throw more attacks and have these attacks hit more. We tweak damage so that the overall lethality of the game is consistent with the current levels that we have live. Also, there's a bunch of timing updates that we have done so that in the flow of fight, it's easier for everybody to understand when they have the initiative or not. These changes overall were mostly introduced in the first testing round that we did a couple months ago. But today we're also going to be discussing another set of changes that will be geared towards specifically addressing some of the light spam frustration that we saw during this testing round.
Okay, that's awesome. So these changes that are coming to TU2, this is all part of this Core Combat update and falling within these types of categories within improving consistency, enhancing offense, and countering, again, the problem that you guys saw within that first initial testing grounds. Clarissa, Stefan, JC, do you guys want to maybe get into the specifics of these changes that are addressing these categories?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about the first point over here, improve consistency. So Stefan, JC, since you guys are the ones who worked on the Core Combat update, what do you guys mean by improving consistency within the game? Is there an issue with consistency on live at the moment?
Yes. So what is happening on live, basically? Today, when you're in a game online, within even the expected normal networking conditions, there's definitely the possibility that the same attack that you throw is going to be have a variability when it comes to what the other person will see. And this applies to all attacks, basically all inputs throughout the game. You might know these terms as buffered and delayed that are causing different kind of effects if you don't know what they are. Basically, a buffered attack is something that feels very comfortable. You're pressing the buttons at a good rhythm when you expect, and the buffered input system collects them as early as possible. Your attack comes out as you want, all is good. What ends up happening to your detriment, however, is it then sends a message as soon as it knows that you press the button to your opponents, and then they get to see the entirety of your attack because the message comes early. And now a delayed attack is people who understand how the system works are saying, well, what if I sent my message at the last possible moment so that there's no buffer ring of that input? Then that message can only be sent when the attack is about to begin. This therefore means there's going to be a certain amount of time that that message is going to take to get there, and that gets cut off of the beginning of the attack. So the opponent will see whatever, an 800 ms heavy get cut off by 33 ms or 66 ms or whatever interval it takes to get there.
Okay.
I
no,
I was just going to say this applies to every attack and input in the game. And what you end up with is players who understand the system using this to get as many delayed and therefore slightly shorter attacks as possible, and people who are unaware sometimes having buffered, sometimes having delayed, and it being a very inconsistent result.
Yeah, and I guess in live, I guess determining whether the attack is buffered or delayed, if you're not familiar with what delayed or buffered is, it's very hard to see on live. So for example, you might see someone throw out like a heavy, but you don't know if they delayed it or not. So if they delayed it and you don't know it, you'll probably try to comfortably block it or whatnot, and then it doesn't really work, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And it becomes more and more apparent with a light, for example, right? Like,
yeah.
Think about it like when you fight a bot, right? A bot is always perfectly buffering all their attacks. So you see the entirety of like a 500 ms light, for example. However, in player conditions, sometimes it'll be 500, sometimes it'll be 466, sometimes it'll be 433. It's variable in each game and against each input by every opponent. So what we want to try to do is, can we introduce some consistency here so that when you press this button, the opponent will always see this much. You will get your input still at the time you press the button. Nothing changes there. But now you have a consistent level of expectation of the success of your attack.
Cool. So can you go into more details about the changes to address this specific consistency problem, and why is it better for the player?
Yeah. So if we have a video for this. So what I can tell you, like if on the video you look carefully on all three slides as to when the little red indicator appears for the Nobushi there, you can see on live buffered, delayed, and what we have on core combat update. So on live buffered, with what Stefan was explaining, is that you see the full duration of the attack every single time. So it comes out a little bit like you see the arrow for a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Live delayed, you see it for a little bit less, and on core combat update, you see it for 100 milliseconds less every single time. So basically, that's a light neutral, so it's 500 on buffered, 433 on delayed, and 400 with the core combat update. That's really, really important, because that ends up being that every attack that we throw is going to have a very, very consistent speed. Obviously, network conditions can affect this a little bit, but if you're within 100 milliseconds of ping with other players, you're usually good with latency. So the idea is that with this system, all of your attacks are always going to be super consistent. They're always going to act as if they were delayed. So it makes it a lot more consistent. It makes it better, and it removes the mechanical difficulty and the knowledge of knowing, oh, I have to hit my chain or something on a very, very specific frame. Now, clearly, we can't be consistent and have all of this at 0 milliseconds and keep all the attack speeds at the same, because there's network conditions and all that sort of stuff. So we decided to go, okay, well, 100 millisecond latency is probably the worst players typically have in normal conditions. So we cut it off at there. So everything is kind of hidden for 100 milliseconds to give chance for the network message that Stefan was talking about to reach the other player. If within that 100 milliseconds, it removes a lot of rollbacks, it removes like flickers, all that sort of stuff. So that's very, very useful. And yeah, so that's pretty much what we've been doing. It's really useful. We also know that this not only applies, like Stefan was saying, it doesn't only apply to attacks, it also applies to feints. So we also have a video for feints. Yeah, so on feints on this side, you can look at when the raider there like feints and returns back to neutral on both sides. You'll see they're synced. So that means that in both cases, the opponent started a zone at the same time, hit feint at the exact same time, but the result is a little bit different. On the live side, you see the attack starting out and the indicator and the unblockable indicator coming out as soon as possible. On the core combat update, it comes out at 100 milliseconds later. But the important thing here is that there's a very, very specific breakpoint that is kind of hard to see here, but that at some point on the live version, you stop seeing the unblockable indicator, whereas on the core combat update, you still see it, because the feints are also delayed by 100 milliseconds. This was still possible beforehand on live, but it's very difficult to do because you have to feint at the very, very, very last second. Now, whenever you feint, you always get that benefit. It makes those attacks, it makes the feints actually much harder to react to. We know there's some cases of really, really good players who are able to react to those feints, to the normal buffered feints, and determine before you feint or not, like when the feint happens, actually, if it was a feint or not. Whereas with the core combat update, because the timing is much stricter, it's a lot more difficult to be able to see and know, okay, that my opponent feinted or not. So that gives a really, really big benefit to feinting attacks. It makes unblockables much stronger, because then you have to read, is my opponent going to let it fly? Is he going to feint it? Are they going to soft feint it? This also applies to soft feints as well. So when you soft feint, you keep seeing your attack animation for 100 milliseconds later, and then the soft feint happens immediately. In terms of feints, we see 100 milliseconds instead of 200. So there's all those things. It really, really helps to improve offense, and it's super consistent because, again, This could potentially happen by mistake. Now it cannot. It always happens every single time.
That's cool. And I think what's really cool about the Core Combat update is if you've seen the video here, in the live, when you faint, you see the whole ghost of the skeleton of the body. But in the Core Combat update, I guess you call it the UI, is very different. So you don't see the ghost anymore.
Yeah, we did. There's been a little change to the faint effect, visual effect as well, so that there's less of that big ghosting happen. So yeah, that makes a difference too.
Cool.
So what I really like about this one is like no one's gonna fail to react to a raider zone, right? Like whether it's a perfectly buffered or delayed or now in the Core Combat update, you have the time to react that, hey, here comes the raider zone. What we make it more difficult on is determining once that feint has happened, was it a soft feint to Storming Tap? Was it a soft feint to GB? Was it a hard feint to whatever? Was it letting it fly? That's more difficult. And that's where the emphasis on the mind games, I think, will come into play for all these soft feint characters and so on. So I think that'll be a really good change.
Yeah, so I guess that's it for the networking part. And we talked about consistency. So the next point that we talked about was improving or enhancing offense. So what changes did you make to improve offense? And I guess what we can first start is with stamina.
Yeah, so with stamina, we have a video coming up. And in that video, you should pay attention to the stamina bar that's right under the health bar of the warden there on both sides. So on live, what happens is whenever you throw out an attack, let's say in this case for a heavy, right? That heavy is going to cost you 12 stamina as normal. However, the total stamina consumption for the attack depends on the outcome of the attack. So if your attack gets blocked, you lose more. If it misses, you lose more. If it's parried, you lose more. If it gets superior block. So all these different outcomes had a different stamina cost attached to them. We removed those in the Core Combat update, so you can clearly see on the live version, the warden does like 2 heavies. The first one gets blocked, and you can see the stamina bar starts from full, and then when it gets blocked, you lose a little bit, and then you throw out another heavy. That heavy gets parried, and then when that heavy gets parried, you lose a big chunk of stamina. On the Core Combat update, this does not happen, and both heavies cost 12 stamina straight every single time. We did this so that it would really help and impact offense, because the idea is that right now with the negative penalties, it feels kind of bad when you're attacking and things get blocked, because you're like, okay, well, I'm losing more stamina, I have to hold back, I have to stop and wait for my stamina to come back. Whereas in this case, you don't have to. You're able to press more buttons, you're not out of stamina as much. And you can also use your heavies to initiate your offense, and not necessarily to do what I like to call like a soft opening of an opponent. Whereas you're going to spend 12 stamina, and if they don't parry it, if they just block it, which is what happens a lot of the time, then you still get access to your mix-ups and all of your really good chain offense, but without having to pay that extra stamina penalty that slowed you down again. So that makes it a lot more interesting. It makes it much better. You can, like I was saying, you can attack a lot more. Whenever you get parried, you're still going to get damage back. You're still going to get all these things, so that's good. It's literally just a question of letting you be able to attack more and not getting penalized by the outcome of your attack as much as it.
What's interesting there too is like when it comes to the heavies and so on, like it keeps the pace of the combat a little bit better. There's less downtime, less waiting, less out of stamina state. These are all good things. And at the same time, when you're still parried, you still have such frame disadvantage that you get a free light or heavy against you. So still the penalty of being in the wrong state, taking damage for free, and, well, not for free. They took a risk and they parried. And they get to continue their offense in their chain. That's a big negative. Stamina doesn't need to be part of that negative.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too is that, like, now if you like parrying is like when you get parried, you're still gonna take damage. That's a no-brainer. But the thing is that because those heavies now kind of soft enable your offense, and it puts a bit of a higher emphasis on parrying those heavies. But then because the feints are also better, it makes parrying the heavies a little bit harder. So there's all those elements that play together that make your offense more viable and work in a much better way. You can't just go, oh, I'm just going to block all of his heavies and then just it doesn't matter because they're going to
put them out of stamina. Exactly.
That's it. You're going to put them out of steam, and that's the beginning of it. So that's really, really interesting.
Totally.
Okay, that's cool. So I guess with the stamina penalties removed, is this the only change regarding stamina that you guys are addressing, or is there more? I know that in the testing grounds, the biggest feedback that we got was light span frustration. So how does stamina, how did you guys change stamina in terms of addressing light span?
All right, so we have another video for this as well. This is a new change that we've implemented. In this video, you can look at the stamina bar again for the Aramusha on both live and core combat update. So we've increased the stamina cost of all light attacks in the game, or most of the light attacks anyway, to 12. From typically 6, sometimes it was lower. So the idea here is that you can still throw out light attacks. They're still going to be useful. They're still going to be good poke tools. They land more often, from what our stats told us with those changes. But we do not want those light attacks to be like the only viable form of offense for a lot of players. We want players to be able to use all of their kit, to vary their attacks, vary their things. So you can see here when you compare what's on live with core combat update, is that on live, the Aramusha shreds the Zanhu, and at the end of that infinite light chain, still has more than half of his stamina left. Whereas with the core combat update, yeah, he still kills the Zanhu with every single light attack landing, but he ends up being out of stamina. If any of those light attacks were blocked, missed, dodged, whatever happened, he would not have been able to kill the Zanhu one shot with this. So this really, really helps with lowering the effectiveness of light spam. You can still mash buttons, you can still hit light, you can still do all that stuff, but you're gonna have to think about it a little bit more if you're trying to do that, because it will not be as effective as it is on live today.
That's what I like about the switch that you make with these two changes. Removing the stamina penalties on block and parry and so on is not helping the person who can't deal with light spam, right? They're getting hit by everything because they can't deal with it, right? This is much more targeted at, hey, do you really want to spend literally your whole stamina bar if you have an infinite chain, and for others, it's not really possible? That's actually helping the person who's having difficulty dealing with these lights. And so for me, this is a really well-targeted change.
Cool, and I agree. So I guess if I understand correctly, we made attacks, fight moves basically a little faster, so they're going to be harder to react to. And we are being very generous with stamina, so now we are encouraging people to be more offensive and actively fight for their victory. Isn't there a downside to this where maybe the fights will be too quick instead of too long, or what do you guys feel about?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. When we first introduced these changes and tested them internally, the first few games that we did, yes, there was that issue. Like everybody was feeling much better about their offense. They could throw attacks. It was great. But games were much shorter. Duels were much shorter, and overall duration, even in Dominion, got impacted badly. And this is why we looked at damage as a whole. Again, at the start, it was really to make sure that we maintain the sort of time to kill that we have on live, maybe even extend it a little bit more, so you get a bit more time to sort of adjust your defense, try and block, try and read the next attack. And so this is why we made the first TG changes, where we try to lower damage mostly on lights. And again, after the first TG, we went back and looked at damage really more. Yes, on the team, on the time to kill aspect, but also on the light spam frustration aspect. And so the way that the design team looked at damage was really to make sure that how do we clearly give distinct functions to light and heavies? Do you want to talk about this a bit more, JC?
Yes. So we have a video that's talking about damage values. Yeah. So the idea that we're pushing forward is that basically light attacks are more meant to be used as pokes, as quick interrupts, as quick attacks, but are not meant to be your main damage source. So in this video, we really highlighted the damage difference for light attacks. On the left and the right, you can see the damage. You can see on the damage that actually is caused on the Gladiator, right? So in both cases, the Conqueror is like spamming light chain, infinite light, and there's a clear difference in the amount of damage that is dealt with that light chain. On the live version, you end up killing the gladiator rather quickly, and then the gladiator on the core combat update still has a third or close to a third or a quarter of his life left, which makes a big difference. Those light attacks will not be as impactful, but they're still useful. The other philosophy that we've had that was in the previous testing grounds as well was that openers deal less damage, and as you go into your chain attack, into your finishers, those attacks end up dealing more damage. This impacts a lot of stuff, namely parry punishes, and impacts a lot of different things. But we wanted to be able to encourage players to go deeper into their chains, use their heavy finishers, use their light finishers to use their entire kit to get to where fights feel more dynamic, and you feel like, okay, well, my opponent bested me because they've been using their entire kit, and they're trying to, they outread me and they outbeat me, instead of just, well, okay, this guy is spam lightning.
So you're saying that like the emphasis is lights are doing less damage, openers and counter-attacking punish tools are doing less damage, but your chain finishers and so on is where the damage is lying, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, your heavy finishers will do more damage on average than on live. Like damage values have been readjusted across the board again. People that play Highlander, he adjusted his damage values so they're more consistent with what he's supposed to have. So I know there was a lot of complaints about that, so we're doing this.
Cool. Okay, so I guess we can go back to the PowerPoint where we have all the main objectives. So we just talked about damage values, and the next one we'll be talking about, I believe, will be recoveries and timings. So we said that we normalized recoveries. Can you give us more details about this and what it means?
Yeah, so normalized recoveries means that we took the recovery on hit, block, and interrupt block, basically when your lights get interrupted or when you get superior block, and we normalize them to be the same value for all the heavy finishers and all the light attacks. The idea being that you get frame advantage or disadvantage after certain attacks to give a back and forth effect for players in this case. So with the next video we're showing is going to be more about the heavies. So I was talking about before that we want to encourage players to use their heavy finishers more, and this is one of the things we're doing for this, right? So in this case, when you look at what happens to the Kensei and to the Centurion at the end of the chain, on the live version, Kensei, if he threw out his top heavy finisher, for example, and then mashed a light, the Centurion, if he mashed a light, would beat out anything that Kensei could do. So that made a huge difference, because now you're like, okay, I can throw out my heavy finisher, it's going to do a lot of damage, but it's going to put me in a disadvantaged situation afterwards. What we've been doing with those recoveries now is that you're always advantaged when you land a finisher, either it's a light or a heavy. But in the case of heavies, what's really interesting with this is that you're always much more advantaged. So it's your turn again to attack. So you're going to want to throw out your heavy finishers. They're going to put you in advantage when they land, most of the time when they're blocked as well, so that you keep attacking. And the concept of it's my turn, it's your turn, it's my turn, it's your turn is a little bit different, where you get frame advantage, so you can keep attacking without your opponent being able to interrupt anything you do. That's the big thing. And so with this, it really impacts heavy finishers, like I was saying, because you want to use them because you can keep the momentum going.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about just like the concept of frame advantage for frame disadvantage is that it also promotes more of like a read-based strategy. So it's not like you're relying on reacting to someone's attacks, but it's like, oh, this guy just finished his heavy finisher. Okay, I can't really do anything yet because it's still his turn.
Exactly. The thing is, he might do nothing. Like the Kensei in this case does not need to attack right away, but he has the choice of deciding, am I attack? Do I keep the offense on? Do I keep the pressure on? Do I hold back a little bit, see what my opponent's going to do? Yeah.
And that's where it becomes very interesting on the mind game too, right? Like, the really cool thing to note is that your heavy finishers are rewarding you to throw. Whereas before, you get wrecked if you tried to press a button afterwards. Now, you could press a light and it's going to run whatever they're going to do. Therefore, that means you know that they know they can't throw a light against your light because your light will hit them first, right? That's bad for them. So they won't press light, probably. If they don't press light, now you could have pressed heavy instead of light, because they're going to be afraid and sit back and respect your turn. And what we're giving you is reward for doing your heavy finisher. You get the turn, you get to make a pick. You can pick anything, and they should respect it. If they stop respecting it because you're throwing heavies all the time, that's a loop, that's a mind game. So it's open now.
Yeah,
What's good too, there's another fringe benefit to this is in group fights. Beforehand, because like most of the heavy recoveries have been really lowered, so in group fights you would never use your heavy finishers because you would get punished constantly. With this, it's harder to get punished when you're using them. So it's also like another good benefit to using them.
All right, so we talked about heavy finishers, but what about the light attack recoveries?
Yeah, so as I was talking about with lights, we can see in the next video. Yes, here we are. So if you look on the live and core combat update sides, you can see what happens after the warden throws out like double lights. And what happens is like on the live version, if Kensei goes, okay, if Centurion goes light, and then the warden mashes light afterwards, if both players actually mash light, then the players end up trading. So what this creates is it kind of doesn't help. It puts the situation back to full neutral, and it encourages players to light spam. There is some instances where at the end of this, the attacker was still advantage over the defender. He could still throw out lights, which meant for like it really didn't help the light spam feeling. So what we did in the core combat update is that every single light attack in the game, or like the vast majority of them, are frame disadvantaged when they land. So in the core combat update, you can see the Centurion throws light, and they both mash light, and the Warden's light lands before the Centurion's light lands, so they don't trade, they don't do anything, and basically the Warden wins the exchange in this case. So what it does is it helps. This creates the back and forth situation, and we're doing this in part to help minimize the light spam. Whereas if you want to finish with a light finisher, it's your choice. You can still do it, and they're going to be fast and they're hard to react to. They're like, they don't hit as hard, but it's still easier damage. But you leave yourself open afterwards to your opponent doing something. So like we were talking before, if after a heavy you throw out a heavy and you keep your momentum, when you throw out a light, you lose your momentum afterwards. If it's your light finisher, or if you stop attacking in the middle of the change.
And what's really good to emphasize there is like if you use heavies in your chain and go for the heavy finisher, you're rewarded, right? It's still your turn.
Yeah.
If you try to light spam, eventually your chain is going to end, and your turn is over. You have given up your turn. The other person can do whatever they want to take initiative, and then the light spam.
Yeah, but I guess being frame disadvantaged doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because if you know you're frame disadvantaged, then you can use that with mind games. So you can condition your opponent being like, okay, I'm gonna use my light chain. I'm gonna end with the light. Let me see what they're doing. And if you do the same thing over and over again, then at least for example for me, maybe I'll try to start attack again. I'll see them attack. I'll feint it, and I'll either block or punish them. And so this also promotes more of a back and forth conversation with the players. So I personally really like these changes. But now, so we see here that they're both going to be mashing light at the end. Is attacking the only way for me to counter lights? The light chain, like the frame disadvantage, is there other ways? Yeah,
so the other thing that we've done that it was mostly there in the testing grounds, but now it should be everywhere, is the fact you can now always dodge multiple simultaneous lights in a chain. For example, here Centurion does like light. You could have dodged the second light. Whenever an opponent's gonna do light into another light, that second light will always be dodgeable, no matter what. It doesn't necessarily apply to heavy then light, but light to light always works. So if somebody's light spamming you, you can start to just smash dodge in between their lights, and you'll be able to dodge. If you have a dodge that, you can probably counter their attack as well. So because there were situations on the live game where this was not possible at all, you would always get tagged out of it, or you had to have your guard on the right spot whenever you dodge. It was a lot more complicated. Now it's consistent and it always works.
Cool. Okay, so I know that we also have specific heroes who have light attacks that are super fast, like 400 ms. So did you guys make any changes to these heroes with very fast light attacks?
Yeah, so on the next little video that we have, we can see that Shaolin, Peacekeeper, Lawbringer, and Orochi all had neutral, like opener lights or zone in the case of Peacekeeper, that were faster than 500 milliseconds. they are now all 500 milliseconds. So that means that Shaolin Top Light, Peacekeeper Zone, Lawbringer Top Light, and Orochi Top Light are all 500 milliseconds from neutral. That was a necessary thing because what ended up happening is that if we didn't do this, I know some players are might be a bit oh, why did you take that away from me? But the problem is that by not doing this, we end up breaking the rule that we have for frame advantage after lights. So for example, if you had a 400 ms top light and you have frame advantage after a light chain, you could potentially have traded or done things in a way that kind of breaks the rules and the direction we're trying to go with this. But that's a big part of why we did this. The other thing too is that at higher level, they're not that useful because players just block in the direction they're going to come and they always get blocked anyway. But that's a big change that we've done for this.
Cool. So then what about fast dodge attacks?
Yeah, so on the next slide, we'll see. We've also added 33 milliseconds to all of these characters' dodge attacks. The reason being that we found a lot of the time when you were doing heavy parry, heavy feint into a parry, for example, when those attacks were still 500 milliseconds, it became really, really hard to see the indicator. So we slowed them down by 33 ms. It's not a big change, but it really helps. It helps counter the light spam. It makes them a little bit more reactable from neutral. So it's not like I can just go, dodge into something and always tag my opponents. Now it's a little bit harder to do. So it's not huge, but it really helps with the comfort of parrying those attacks. It helps they're a bit easier to dodge. They're a bit easier to react to. So it makes it a bit more pleasant fighting against these guys.
Okay, that makes sense. So what we'll do now is we'll go back to the PowerPoint so we can do a quick recap, because I know the core combat update, there's so many things going on. So we talked about 5 move speeds, stamina penalties, stamina cost, damage values, recoveries. But we also mentioned here, which wasn't introduced in the testing grounds fight system improvements, is that we made hero-specific changes. Can you talk more about these specific changes?
Yes, so there's 2 that I'm going to talk about. First of all, there's Orochi. So now Orochi was the character we got the most complaints about constantly. So we did 2 major changes to Orochi and his fight kit. His light chained attacks are now 500 milliseconds across the board. They used to be 400 or 433 or 466. There was a bunch of different timings. So now they're all 500 milliseconds. That should help alleviate a lot of the light spam complaints. But to compensate, because that is kind of a big change to him, we made his top heavy finisher to be unblockable. So that gives him a different tool in his kit that he didn't have before. Orochi notably only had unblockables after his deflect. So having access to this makes him better in duels. It makes him more effective. You can actually do stuff externally now with him. You can do like a top heavy into a top heavy unblockable. It opens up a lot of stuff for Orochi. So that's really, really interesting. It gives him a lot more power. So I'll be interested to see how that pans out. And also for Highlander, so we didn't forget your Highlander mains, all of his defensive stance lights are now 500 ms as well. So his openers and his chain are much faster. The timings for the armor, for the spear blocks, all that stuff did not change. So they're still very, very good. And yeah, so we're hoping that this change will also help Highlander players perform a little bit better with the hero after the core combat update comes out.
And then players, if they wanted more information about these changes, they can just check out the patch notes, which will be coming out to detail everything about the core combat update. Another thing that was mentioned in the PowerPoint that we didn't really also implement in the testing grounds or take into consideration are feat changes, correct? We have feat changes coming to the core combat update.
Yeah, generally it's tough to bring down the extremities of a healing, for example. When damage is down kind of across the board, it doesn't make sense that it was quite such high healing values, for example. You'll see it on the patch notes, but basically it's trying to even that out a little bit.
Awesome. So that's mainly it for, what we can cover in the core combat update. Like I said before, like for those who want a full deep dive on the testing grounds debrief, we have an article posted on the website. We have the patch notes to detail everything coming into the update. But also, we want to wrap this up in terms of how does this affect the competitive scene of For Honor, and what it also means for players who are trying to get into competitive?
I mean, for me, I think it's really good for all levels of play, right? At the competitive level, suddenly all these lights that you've never seen before, Conqueror, Light, Infinite Chain, apparently has got an Infinite Chain. Did anyone know that? Not me. So that's cool. Maybe we'll use a second one. As well, I mean, like, the difficulty of telling a light versus a heavy apart is now actually a thing. Whereas before, a lot of the big open, like, hey, it's an Orochi side light, it's like, well, I can tell the side light between that and the side heavy in time to parry the light, right? That's messed up. I'm an old man. I shouldn't have that reaction time. And at the same time, I think it's also going to be very good for mix-ups and stuff like that. I think at every player's level, new players to regular players to hardcore regular players, like, it helps them as well. I mean, for me, I know one of the most exciting parts was at the beginning of the learning curve for Honor, where actually you're like, hey, these moves are all good, these moves are all cool. And then you get to this dip where you start being unable to use all these moves. And here it kind of opens the door up a little bit more as well. And then the other thing it helps is that reaction wall that you hit, where you play some other player who is, hey, I can react to this, I can react to this, I can react to this, and you can't. That sucks, right? So that's kind of going out the window a little bit here, which is going to be much more, I think, helping regular players be able to use their offense and not hit that wall. Competitive players, yes, you've got the mind games, make the reads, and you win.
Yeah, there's a lot of other like benefits also for like all levels of play. Another thing that I end up liking with the lights costing more stamina, for example, and being a little bit less damage, is that bash-based offense, which is a lot of things that we always hear about, like, oh, if this character doesn't have a bash at this or that, it's less necessary now because your attacks are going to land more. Things cost you less stamina, but also when you land a bash, now you have to throw out a light in most cases, and that light is going to cost 12 stamina and deal less damage. So it's not like somebody can just go bash that, and then kill you with a full stamina bar. It's pretty much impossible now. So that's a really, really interesting change that happened too. There's like, I think a lot of players are gonna have to relearn a lot of stuff about those small intricacies that make the game, I think, personally, I find at least a lot more interesting. It makes the neutral game a lot more dynamic. It makes like a lot of stuff more, at the same time, more accessible, because it's no longer about, do I have like reaction times that are like borderline impossible to achieve all the time, and then I can't be hit ever. And it's more about, well, okay, everybody's on a much more even ground, so things are going to land more at all levels of play. So I find that's really, really interesting, and it pushes the game into a much more offensive and fun direction. You can throw out attacks now, and you're not like super scared. Oh, I'm going to throw out a light; it's going to get parry. I'm going to die. So that makes it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to add a few things here, because I'm probably the least skilled of the three designers here. Because yeah, it's really true about these changes are going to bring a lot of positives to all kinds of players, right? It's not just going to be about competitive or about PC versus console and all of that. I'm a console player. I enjoy playing on my PS4. And yeah, what I loved the most about these changes is really the ability for me to go in and press buttons and just, things land. Yes, I get hit more, but I also hit more. I think it makes entering the game for new players a lot more immediate, because you can go in, try things out. You don't have that experience that every time you do something, you get punished instantly. And so, I know that for myself, I felt a lot more comfortable. Even during TG, it was much easier for me to just swap characters instead of sticking to my mains. And yeah, as far as competitive is concerned, the arena had this tournament during testing round, which was great. And you could definitely say that with neutral game being more dynamic, it's more fun to watch. So yeah, we're really happy about those changes, and yeah, we hope everybody will enjoy them, and ultimately that will make the entire experience better for everyone.
Well, guys, on my side, I've been trying to soak in all of the information, and I think I have. I know that this is a broad topic. I don't want you to test me right away, but we have all. I need to review all my notes, but at that same token, we have the patch notes that are going to be defining all of this. I believe also on the website we'll have some details on this as well, because it's a big change. You guys saw it at the beginning of the video, and for myself, more of a casual player, as you guys know, and you guys will see right after this when we're playing live here on Tyrant's Test. That my skills are not quite up to par. It just seems that these changes will reinvigorate, give kind of a breath of fresh air into the way that we experience For Honor. So again, guys, thank you so much for taking your time. I know this is a deep conversation. I'm personally very curious to see how these changes are going to go on the live game now. On August 6th, again, this is not today. It's going to be live on August 6th with the launch of the Warmonger. So again, thank you for your time. Again, let's get hyped because Tyrant's Test is live, and we'll be right back after this. Me and myself, Clarissa, we're going to come live and play that. So again, thank you for your time and for sticking with us for this pre-recorded segment. We'll be right back for Tyrant's Test.